Hi, everyone. That was nice. I always like when there's a little bit of hello back, especially when me and one of the people are standing between you guys and the happy hour. So thank you. So today I'm going to be sharing lessons about type from a developer's perspective. And unlike Jeff this morning, I actually had too many titles for my talk when I was coming up with this. Maybe something like, I'm a developer, please don't hate me. Or maybe something like, playing developer's advocate. Yeah. Or maybe my favorite, disclosure, I fell asleep while watching the movie Helvetica. I went through these, but essentially I ended up with these delicious sandwich layers. And in each one of these layers, we're going to take a look at different aspects of web typography and when we implement them into websites. But before I get to this, I want to talk to you guys today a little bit about one of my passion projects. And it's something that's really important to me, and it involves two things that I love. The Philadelphia Phillies and sandwiches. Now, the Philadelphia Phillies play at Citizens Bank Park, and that is not Citizens Bank Park. Philadelphia Phillies and sandwiches, just in case you forgot. But anyway, they play at Citizens Bank Park, and at Citizens Bank Park, there are a plethora of different food options. And I'm a vegetarian, and Citizens Bank Park has been voted the #1 most vegetarian-friendly ballpark for the last 4 years running. You can get almost anything vegetarian there. You can get a veggie cheesesteak, you can get a veggie dog. At one point, we even had vegetarian crab cakes. Not very good, but we had them. Now, there's one place that does not have anything vegetarian in the ballpark, and that is the Schmitter stand. In fact, the Schmitter stand only actually serves one thing: the Schmitter sandwich. Now, what exactly are you looking at, I am sure you are asking? Well, let me tell you what you're looking at here. You are looking at a multi-layered sandwich, starting with a Kaiser bottom bun, some steak, some fried onions, more cheese, melted cheese, special sauce, and that little nice slice of grilled salami. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, that looks gross. Me? I was jealous. I wanted to be able to eat something like this. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I feel like something in my life is missing if I can't eat a sandwich as gross as this. So what did I do? Well, I do what any good nerd does. I thought about it a lot, and I had a few drinks, and then I went home and I registered vegetarianschmitter.com. If I build this site, my veggie schmitter will come. So, starting on any new website, including this one, we have to start with layer 1, our sturdy bottom bun. Have you guys ever eaten one of those sandwiches and it's got a soggy bottom bun and you take a bite and everything starts falling out and you're like, oh, this stinks? Or how about a taco shell and you bite it and it just cracks? Those stink, right? We need something stronger. We need a sturdy foundation. What we need is a successful sandwich, a successful sturdy bun. And that sturdy bun in our websites is designers and developers working together. I remember a story I heard one time from a designer friend of mine. And they were working in-house, and they designed their site, and they were working in Photoshop, and they finished up in Photoshop, and they were like, heck yeah, this looks awesome. Self-high five, right? So they finish it up, and then what do? They send off their design to a third party to be developed. So they had this beautifully picked Gotham font, and what happens? Their site comes back developed, and all of a sudden, their beautiful Gotham was replaced with Times New Roman. Something like that ever happen to anyone here? Yeah, right? Not cool. Without a developer understanding your design intentions, you can choose all the greatest fonts in the world, but end up with super less than stellar results. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. Because I think the more that we talk about these things, the more that we can get on the same language. Because sometimes our language differs. How many of you guys say the first one? How many of you say the second one? You know, it's possible that there's some things that we're just never going to agree on. But I think that, again, the more that we talk about it, the more we'll understand how we work differently, and the more that we can get on the same language, no matter how we might say things.
Helvetica Meow.
Helvetica Neue.
Helvetica New.
Helvetica Neue.
Helvetica Neu.
Helvetica New.
Helvetica Neue.
Helvetica Neu.
Helvetica Neue.
Helvetica Neue.
Helvetica No.
When I worked at HappyCog, I had the pleasure of working with Jason Santamaria, and I also saw him talk a bunch of times. And I'm sure one time he was on stage saying something really smart about type. But what I heard him say was this. And I was like, okay, sounds good. All headlines for Donna, all body copy Georgia, ship it, right? Because as a developer, I love rules. I love formulas. So if we went ahead and took this Georgia Verdana, we could just go ahead and take this formula and apply it to our Vegetarian Schmitter website. And of course, that this formula is based on the constraints of web-safe fonts. We could easily say that these were rules that we had to follow based on how many fonts were installed on the majority of systems. I remember having to be the bearer of bad news so many times over the years to tell people that just some fonts weren't installed on most machines. And of course, we did have some other options, right? We could do some image replacement or cipher or Kufon, but those all had a lot of drawbacks. So I think we can all agree we're in a much happier place now that we have web fonts. And with web fonts, we have a new type of formula to follow, and that's following web trends. We might be able to see that if a font is being used a lot on the internet, then maybe the font hinting done to make it onto the web was really good and it's been successful for other people. And this information's out there. You can take a look at things like Google fonts and switch from trending to popularity, and then we can see what the top Google fonts that are being used. Open Sans is used 3 times the amount of any other closest Google web font. Over the past summer, Roboto has jumped up actually 2 spots, and Source Sans Pro has also jumped into the top 10 for them. This information is also available on fonts.com on their blog, where they update every month. You can see that on their list, it's been a lot of similar over the last year or so, though Helvetica has popped in there recently. The other thing that's really nice that fonts.com does is it'll tell you a little bit about who's using the font. So you can see something like they'll tell you that the font's being used on a site like LG or BBC2. Typekit also has this information. They tell you what the most favorited fonts are on the site. So you can see the list here. I did a blog post about this on the List Apart blog and talking about where you can find all this information, and Matthew Rex from Typekit also provided some information about what the most viewed fonts on Typekit are. So what we can do with this is we can say, you know what, it looks like a lot of people are using Proxima Nova and it's working out really well for them. Why don't we try and see how it looks on our site and see if that font works well for us? Sometimes, though, I'll just be browsing the web and I'll see another font and I'm like, I like that font. I like to use this browser extension called WhatFont, and WhatFont allows us to see what font is easily being used without having to dig into the CSS. So you can just enable it, hover over, and it'll tell you which font's being used along with the font sizes and weights. And you can be like, this is fabulous. If any of this goes by too fast, by the way, my notes are also available online, which I'll post afterwards, so you can grab all these links. So maybe I see this and I'm like, you know what? I want to use that font. Out goes the Proxima Nova, and in comes the
Futura.
Futura.
Futura. Futura.
Futura.
Futura. Futura.
Futura.
Futura.
We have a lot of really good options for starting our projects with a successful base. Moving on, I want to talk to you about one of the things that's also been one of the most important successful aspects to building a website, and that's the general styles. I like to think of the general styles like cheese, partially because I just love cheese, and also because, you know, when you eat a sandwich and there's not a slice of cheese on there and everything just crumbles out? But once you melt a slice of cheese on, you get this sandwich, and it's this wonderful, harmonious sandwich. And you're just like, no slipping out. I just want this happy, harmonious sandwich. So I think of the general styles like that, in that they're similar to style guides or pattern libraries, but they focus just on type styles and allow us to create a harmonious system. The idea behind general styles is to give type sizes, settings, and weights to every HTML element out there. So as I'm going through the site, you know, I want to make sure that every aspect or every HTML element has a type style that matches the rest of my site. So if later on I decide maybe I want to add some tabular data about how many veggie schmitters I eat in a season, I'll have that table ready to go. This protects you against the CMS, right? It's really easy for clients to jump in and enter a table or a block quote even though you might not have designed for it. So if you take the time to design for all of these aspects, then you know that once you hand off the site, whatever is added will match the rest of your aesthetic. When Delaware Valley College rebranded, they wanted a new website to match. We were scoped to work through front-end templates and then hand off the templates to their in-house back-end developer for expression engine implementations. When we did this, we wanted to make sure that we provided all the styles that were possible for when they implemented it. I worked with the designer, Michael Johnson, on this, and we created this style guide that essentially did the general styles and then also provided class names and heading styles for them. So what this allowed us to do is we define something, so an H4 or a class of Delta will give you the same style. This allows us to keep semantics. So in the subcolumn, if you have an H2, applying the class of Delta will keep the styles that you want. This stops you from having like, oh, well, it's an H2, so it'll be styled like an H2, and gives you more choices and freedom in your designs. Putting these together is sometimes a smaller, more manageable way than building a robust style guide, especially if you're on tight timelines or budgets. If you're interested more in this, on GitHub, I have a starter file example that you can grab. Taking these extra steps will provide a better handoff, better results after your handoff. And you know, having all these font options is awesome, right? What if we were back in our days of web-safe fonts when all we had to choose were things like serif or cursive if we wanted to get really crazy, but why stop there? We can head on into the fantasy party, right? The generic font family fantasy, I think, was in every website I made from like 1997 to like 2003, maybe still today, but hey. In general, I think we can probably say it's nice that we've entered into this web fonts land. They've kind of changed everything, and we've moved beyond our basic fonts like
Trebuchet.
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 Trebuchet. Trebuchet. Trebuchet.
Trebuchet.
Trebuchet.
Trebuchet. I would never say that. Trebuchet.
my mom calls it Trebuchet. She's the best. As a developer, I love all the new font choices that we have, right? Web fonts add all these new variety and things for us to play with and make our sites more interesting and have more personality. And web fonts have had a great adoption rate, but there's still some things that we have to keep in mind, starting with those pesky cross-browser differences. My friend Anthony told me about this one time, and he was working with this font, and IE9 kept rendering the M- as non-breaking space, even though there was a glyph for that in the typekit font he was using. And this is one of the reasons that we need to be super thorough in the QA testing that we're doing on our websites, which, of course, isn't always easy. We have to make sure that we're setting aside the time and budget to QA, and not just developers or not just QA team, but design QA, right? You don't want to hand off your designs and be like, okay, hope you guys do something good with that, you know? Get in there, get in on that QA phase. Be like, I want to check this out, I want to see what it looks like, and make sure your time is budgeted in the timeline for this. I once worked with a client, and they loved Verdana and Photoshop when font smoothing was on, right? And then all of a sudden we got to a real browser and they're like, this looks like crap. And instead of just going back and being like, okay, you know, we're just going to replace Verdana with Arial, we couldn't do that because once we did that, it broke the whole design system. We ended up having to redo the whole design of the site and spending 6 more weeks on it. It's really important that we make sure that we QA these fonts. And we want to make sure that we're doing that before that we're getting to approval and getting design direction, right? Like we heard before, analytics can be really powerful. Check your analytics. See what browsers people are coming to your site on. Chrome on Windows is notorious for rendering fonts very poorly. So if that's one of your highest browser percentages, make sure that the font you're going to use looks good in that browser before you go all in on it. So what can we do to do that, right? Well, one thing you can do is code up a browser sample. When I worked with Chris Cashdaller, who will be speaking on Friday, he used to say, hey, you know, I'm wondering what this font's going to look like. Could you toss something up so I could see it in IE6? I'm dating us here, Chris, sorry. But you know, that's what we would do. We'd go and we'd look and we'd make sure that it looks okay before we decided to use it, because that's sometimes what our client or what our audience was looking in. So just go ahead and code that up, see how it looks. Luckily, we even have some services that will do this for us. Typekit will allow you to see browser samples. So you can come over here and you can click and be like, okay, how is this going to look on Windows 7 in Chrome or on IE8 on Windows Vista? This is awesome, and it'll make sure, especially different font sizes, right? Sometimes when you get down to that 10-pixel font, it's going to look really jaggedy. So make sure that if you want to use a 10-pixel font, that it's going to look okay on the browsers that your audience will be visiting your site on. Sometimes we try to come up with hacks to fix this too, right? Sometimes fonts will look too heavy, and we'll want to use this WebKit font smoothing anti-aliased, which essentially blurs the font at pixel level so it appears smoother and thinner. This, of course, can lead to a problem. It's really great that these things are available, but we have to remember that when we're fixing something in one browser, that can make it even more different than in another. If we take a look at these screenshots here, we can see Chrome and Firefox, that Firefox is going to appear bolder because it's not going to receive that anti-aliasing. And of course, there's the old mantra, right? Do websites need to look exactly the same in every browser? .com. No, of course they don't, right? This is part of the thing that's been great. You know, we're not coding for Netscape 4 anymore. The web has gotten better. We have a more fluid understanding of this. But we also have to remember that they are going to look different. So once you start talking about bold fonts, your bolder fonts will look even bolder in some browsers. So you want to make sure that you're okay with that result as well. I want you to take a second and I want you to think about, what is your least favorite browser? Y'all got it? That's the browser you should be testing in. Hold the tomatoes. But it's important, right? If your designs look great in your least favorite browser, then pat yourself on the back, right? Give yourself that glass of wine, hit that piñata like you've done it. These are the goals that we have. If it looks good in IE9, I'll buy you a drink. Wait, that's not all you're saying. Cash, take that one back. Okay, but it should still look good. Your coworker should buy you a drink. I don't make that much money. Okay, there are some fixes for this too, right? Sometimes we say, hey, but Jen, there's a JavaScript plugin for that, right? We can detect your browser rendering, we can detect your font rendering, and we can fix it. But you have to remember that we can't just keep throwing on plugins onto our page, right? You throw on a plugin to fix something like this, and you're adding more weight and speed into your pages. And these days, in our responsive world, speed of our sites is so much more important. Now that we're moving into this world with a lot of mobile devices, we have to talk about what will make our sites load faster. The file sizes of fonts can be relatively huge sometimes, so we have to worry about using too many of them or big, heavy ones. You know what they say, right? With great power comes great responsibility. The more fonts and weights and styles that you're using on your website, the longer it's going to take to load. You have to ask yourselves, just because I can do something, should I? Just because I can use all the fonts on the world on one sign, or just because I can put all the fonts on the world on my website, doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. Some services will help us with this. Again, going back to Google Fonts, if you go over here and you're like, let me turn things up to 11 and start adding all these fonts. Let's go nuts. You'll see this handy-dandy meter over here, and it's like, no. Oh, slow down, buddy. You're in the red, letting you know that you've probably gone a little heavy-handed on your font usage. Typekit will also do something like this. If you go over here and you're like, why not use every weight and style possible for this, right? If you go ahead and click Publish, it'll be like, hold on a second, buddy. That's a pretty large font kit that you're trying to use there. The wonderful new Heffler fonts that are out there, they will also give you a warning. That's like, watch out, you're using too much. Now, there's no magic number for your font sizes, right? On these three sites, they'll give you warnings at different times. They're going to be like, watch out. And these aren't necessarily suggested uses either. They're just like, you've obviously had a bad day. You're doing some comfort in your fonts. Let's take a breather. But it's important that you're seeing this with the rest of the speed aspects on your site to decide how many fonts you should be using. And there's some options for this, right? So let's say you're worrying about mobile speed. You can create 2 kits in Typekit. You can use JavaScript to load one for mobile, one for desktop. If that's something where that JavaScript will help save speed on that, then maybe that's something you want to look into. You can read more about this on the Typekit blog. Also, you can use media query. So Dave Rupert did this test, and he found that if you wait to load in a font within a media query, then it won't load to the page until that media query is met. This means if you're designing mobile first and using small screen as your input for mobile devices, you can start with small screens and then wait until you hit a min width to load in another font, and you'll see that when that min width is met, that font would be displayed and loaded to your computer. That said, there are plenty of things that are going to help your page load faster before fonts, but it is something to keep in mind on top of all the other things going into your website. Another thing you can do here is buried into mobile settings in Typekit, they actually allow you to disable or enable fonts for your mobile devices. By default, it starts enabled. I did a quick test to see how much of a difference this makes, and I just did a quick loading of one weight of Proxima Nova onto a page, and by default, its weight was 32 KB. I then compared load times on an iOS 5.1 on a 3G connection. And what I found is when I disabled them, it went from 4 requests to 2, and from 32 KB to 10 KB. Again, this is just one weight, so imagine how this is going to go up when you're having multiple weights and fonts on your sites. This is another thing to consider if you're getting really into how to optimize your sites. No matter what, you should always be finding fallback fonts. You know, sometimes we're relying on external CSS files to load those fonts, or sometimes we're using JavaScript, which can block loads, or maybe the JavaScript won't load. One thing that's good to do is to declare your fallback. And another browser extension I like to use is this fallback, which will be really nice. So you can pop that open. It'll show you your default font. It'll show you your backup font. Or you can look up your backup font just by itself so you can see and make sure that things are looking good if your #1 font does not load. You can also see a handy list of what most common fonts are on mobile devices on Jordan Moore's blog here with this post about TinyType. We should also consider that web fonts sometimes will add into our budget, right? So something that is an important service, it's still something to discuss with our clients. We also have to remember that it's our job to help our clients understand why this cost is important. We need to remember that we are here to explain to them how adding web fonts will be a huge benefit to our site by giving its personality and difference versus other sites on the web. And it's something that by sharing with them the different options they have for it can help them be educated. Now, of course, sometimes it's just not an option. Sometimes paying for a font service is not something that's possible for your site that you're working on. For many different reasons, that's a possibility. The good news is that there's a lot of great free fonts out there these days. FontScroll has a variety of them, and you can filter by this on that right-hand side. The League of Movable Type has really great fonts under the SIL Open Font License. Adobe Edge Web Fonts is similar to Typekit, but it's free to use. And sure, not all Google fonts are created equal. That is definitely the case, but there are some really nice ones out there. Bucketlessly is using Noto Serif and Open Sans on their site. This rule of 3 is using Sortsmill, Gaudi, Righteous, and Roboto. The Juliana Bicycles is using Roboto and Quicksand. There's also this really great site called Beautiful Web Type, which showcases all different examples of Google web fonts that are out there used together and paired quite nicely. So maybe if I can't use a paid-for font, I can go ahead and grab one of those free Google web fonts and drop it onto our site. And with the success of web fonts, it's no surprise that icon fonts have gained a lot of popularity. I love icon fonts. That's why they get the bacon level, because I'm told that bacon's the best level. Icon fonts are essentially like wingdings on steroids. I am not saying Arnold Schwarzenegger is on steroids, but I am saying that Arnold Schwarzenegger could knock a wingding in its face. Be an exciting new movie. Be a terrible movie. But as you can see, icon fonts, even with only being one color, have a lot of different customization options that we have for them, as you can apply any CSS property to them and have them take that. And there's a lot of icon fonts out there. This one is Font Awesome. Font Awesome was created to be used with Twitter Bootstrap, but can be used without Twitter Bootstrap and is completely free. Different icon fonts have different ways of implementation, but lots of times they're very similar to web fonts, in which you can self-host the font, declare it just like you would any other font face, and then on any element with a class of FA, we will display that generated content in that font. Icon fonts are so extremely easy to use, it's one of the advantages they have over using something like an SVG icon. Again, it uses the CSS, well, Font Awesome in this case uses CSS before generated content to make the bullhorn display to the screen. Of course, since it's generated content, this won't be used in IE 7 or below, so if you are supporting those browsers, one, I'm sorry, and two, you'll have to find a different solution for that. Let's look at another example. This is Symbol Set. And we used Symbol Set, again, on that Del Val college website. And they offer a lot of great icons, and what's nice about them is they have different sets here, so that can help keep your costs low, and also keep your loading low, as you can use only the sets that you need for your website. One of the other things I love about Symbol Set is they have great customer service. It's really important to research customer service before you pay for something. This is a general rule of thumb, but especially in icon fonts. You know, go to their Twitter page, see how often they're actually answering people's questions. If you're working on a project late at night and it's like 11 p.m. and an icon is rendering as some sort of crazy glyph, it's good to know that you can call someone or get support right away if you're on a deadline. And though there are a lot of similarities in icon fonts, there's also a ton out there for us to choose from. Guys, want to hear a joke? Why do seagulls live by the bay? Why don't seagulls live by the bay? Because then they'd be bagels. Want to hear another joke? Why did the farmer start listening to punk rock? Because he was sick of Hall & Oates. Still going. Still a lot of icon fonts for you to choose from, but we'll just go ahead and move on and say that icon fonts are super awesome. Minus that they give you time to tell terrible jokes. The number one reason they're awesome is because it means no more image sprites. Oh, cutting image sprites was the worst, and now we don't have to anymore. We also saw that they're super easy to customize, so they're great. You can get them right onto your page. You can start adding all these CSS things. You can have shadowing. You can have colors. You can have borders on them. Another great reason? We don't need to create retina images anymore, right? How annoying are those? With icon fonts, you'll get vector-based crisp icons all around that will scale to whatever device that we're looking on, which is super important because at the rate things are going these days, right? We have these comically large tablets, and I don't want to create retina images for that. I just want it to happen automatically, which it will with our icon fonts. You can also make your own icon fonts, right? Like let's say you have a customized site and you want your own series of them, you can create them. There's some websites out there to help you with this. GlyphSap is a great one that allows you to do this. Another site is IcoMoon. IcoMoon has their own icon fonts, but what's great about it is they also have plans that you can use your own custom icon fonts along with theirs. So let's say that they have every icon you want, but maybe it's missing one or two, or you need something specially designed for your client. You can just upload them and add them to this set and use them in conjunction with one another. There are a lot of great reasons to start using icon fonts, but icon fonts and web fonts, there's also some things that we have to keep in mind when it comes to accessibility. Accessibility with icon fonts can be a little bit tricky. ARIA roles are used in conjunction with screen readers to help people better understand the content on your site. So you'll see in some icon fonts, you'll get this wacky markup with things that say something like span class equals icon L span next, which will be read to a screen reader. So what we want to do for things like that is to use the ARIA attribute ARIA hidden and set that to true, and then it won't be read to screen readers. This is going to tell screen readers with ARIA support that that's unsemantic text that's going into the browser. You can also use private use area in Unicode, which doesn't correspond to any semantic elements, which means that we can use that as well, which is something that GitHub is using on their Octa icons font face. And you can see here that that will not be red.
Visit link, blog.
And so using that aria hidden stopped that icon from being red. Another thing to consider when it comes to accessibility is contrast. The contrast ratio on our website should be 4.5 to 1 to make sure that people coming to your website can actually read your content. You know, it's tough to make all this beautiful work and then not have people be able to read it, so we want to make sure that we're following these guidelines. There's tools out there that can help us with this. The WebAIM contrast checker, you can put in different inputs and make sure and see if it's going to pass or fail test for WCAG. That's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's also some really nice browser extensions for Firefox and for Chrome. This is the Chrome accessibility tools, in which case you can run an accessibility audit. And it will give you any errors that you have for things like this does not have reasonable contrast rates. And it will suggest for you also what you should do to alter the color to make sure that it does meet that 4.5 to 1 WCAG AA recommendation. In the future, there's some really great things that are recommended in the next level of media queries, including environmental media features, which will do things like you can test for if the lighting is dim, and then you can up your contrast ratio based on that. So fingers crossed, with the spec, you kind of always have to do that, but that'll be implemented sooner rather than later. You know, we've been using EMS for a long time now in browsers, but with the way that the responsive design is coming, it's becoming even more important to get back into this practice instead of using pixels for our font sizes. A great thing to use is rems, which are root ems, so that's based on the root element of a thing. If any of you guys have ever sized text in ems, you know when you get that M within an M and everything starts inheriting and all of a sudden you have super big or super small fonts and you're like, this stinks. Rems solve this problem because they are based on the root HTML element. This is supported in browsers in IE9 and above, so it's very well supported. One of the biggest advantages to using EMS or REMS on your font sizes when it comes to media queries is to be able to quickly change how big or small your font is based on sizes. So if we go ahead and we can say something like, you know what, all of our paragraphs are going to be 1M, all our H1s are 2Ms, we can use a media query just on the HTML elements to say, hey, by default 14 pixels, but then once we meet 40 Ms, let's jump up that default size to 16 pixels. Or if we go ahead and we can do 18 pixels larger. And what this will do is globally change our font size smaller to bigger depending on what media query is met with just changing one rule in the top of our CSS document. It's really neat that we can take advantage of the cascade now in order to do different screen sizes with different font sizes. If we take a cue from the elements of typographic style applied to the web, then we would know that they recommend an ideal line length of 45 to 75 characters, or 66 or 40 to 50 for multiple columns. This is really important because we want to make sure that everything on our site is legible for people coming to see this. There's a nice browser bookmarklet from Chris Coyer, which will show you when you're reaching that 45 to 75 mark. So if I go ahead and select and click, that red highlighted text is where those 45 to 75 characters are, which means if I see this, I might want to go back in and alter my designs to change the line length and make things more legible for my audience. Is anyone here using Typecast? A few people out there? So Typecast I really like. Typecast allows us to style type in the browser and share those projects with other people on your team or with your client. It's a way to avoid Photoshop if that's something you're looking to do. And it can be really important if you have a project with a shorter timeline. So why ideally I love to start things with general styles. Sometimes you're doing a passion project. Sometimes you don't have the timeline or budget. So I started a site called Ladies in Tech a while ago that encourages more female speakers in technology. And it was a really interesting dilemma that we had here. We had a bunch of people that really wanted to write for the site, and we had all this great content, and it was all sitting in Google Docs, and we're like, we have all this great content, but we have no design. It's like the exact opposite of lorem ipsum problem, right? Like normally you get your designs, it's all lorem ipsum, and everyone's like, yeah, but then you get real content. We're like, when does this ever happen? We actually have content in a timely manner, but we have no place to put it. This was a problem, right? So what do? Well, we wanted to get it out as fast as possible to people. So what's one of the fastest things you can do? You get a WordPress site, right? So I grabbed a WordPress, put the default theme on there, and then instead of just letting it go out like this, I worked in Typecast with the designer Yesenia Perez-Cruz. Yesenia Perez-Cruz went into Typecast and designed type styles for the Ladies in Tech site. No Photoshop, no layers, just straight type styles. I then took these type styles from Typecast and applied them to the WordPress theme. Is it the most custom design in the world? No, but we do now have personality to a WordPress theme that we were able to ship early and ship often and make adjustments on the fly while not hiding this content in Google Docs and never launching. I cannot tell you how many domains I own where I never launched something because I didn't have a perfect design for it. So this was a way that we got our content out fast to our audience. You know, we heard before the whole shipping early and often, and this is a way that we can do this while still maintaining great type styles for our websites. Okay, so coming up is my least favorite sandwich layer, but it's one that's very important, the little onions. No one wants to play the bad guy, but it's really important that we discuss roadblocks for our teams and how we can overcome them. So here's just a few little tidbits that can make developers cry like onions. Plan your designs and text for variable content. My friends, plan your designs and text for variable content. The web is not print. The web is a beautiful, flexible medium, which can have short content, which can have long content. We need to be able to make sure that we are designing for all of these types of content. I can't tell you how many times I've had to ask a designer, what happens if the content gets longer here? What happens if the content gets shorter here? What happens if there's no content here? You know, and the answer of, well, let's add more content isn't exactly an answer, right? Take away more content. No. We have to make sure that we're working in this fluid medium and that we're respecting that with our designs. So this is something that you're going to want to plan for. So let's say you have this beautifully designed calendar, and in the first row, everything's fitting, right? Everything's the same height. It's wonderful. Yes, wouldn't it be wonderful if all of the Walk the Gardens had the same levels of characters? But that's not likely. So what do? Show your design of what happens when things get longer. That way, as a developer, I have a blueprint to follow. If you do not provide this to me or to someone else, then hopefully I'll come back to you and say, well, what should happen? But sometimes that won't happen, and a developer will take matters into their own hands, right? Maybe instead I'll decide that the content should be truncated so everything stays the same height. Maybe instead I'll just let the calendar grow with all the content and you'll end up with uneven type boxes and it'll look like crap. By taking the extra step to provide this blueprint, then you are guaranteed that that bad design implementation will not happen to your beautiful designs. Again, choose a product with a good track record. This is really important, especially if you're going to pay for things, but even if you're using free services. I worked on a website for Einstein Medical Center, and Ora Seltzer and I, she was the designer on it. She found a perfect icon font to use for our very limited icons. All we needed was the search magnifying glass, the hamburger list menu over there, and then an open and close on the menu there. Not too many icons, so we figured let's just use a free font because we only need 4 icons. But we ended up with this crazy bug where on Android 4.1, when you would load up the screen and switch from horizontal to portrait, all of a sudden the icon would disappear. Naturally, right? Because that's the things that happen. And I was like, well, this is weird. Why is this happening? Let me go ahead and contact them to see what the issue is. But what happened was the Web Symbols Typeface website had gone from this when we first started to this when I went back. And I was like, I don't read this. I'm not really sure what to do here. And I was at a loss, right? You went back a few months later, and it turns out that the guy who made it had moved and decided to open it up someplace else. And this is a free font This is totally his prerogative. This was not his fault, but it taught me a valuable lesson in that Android 4.1 is the worst, and I hate it more than IE 6, and that you should choose a product where you know you're going to get help, especially if you're starting something new. In this case, this is one of my earlier implementations of icon fonts, and I was a little bit unaware of how I can fix this problem. So again, normally I like to start a project with general styles, but sometimes you don't know what will happen. So what happens when I get a new design that doesn't have general styles, right? Well, one of the things I like to do is a little bit of a type audit. And I'll go through the designs and I'll start writing down all the different examples of type I see throughout the designs. So sometimes I'll be writing things down and I'll be like, okay, there's a 9-pixel font, there's a 10-pixel font, 11, 12, and I'm all like, it's a dark place being a developer. It's really not that bad, but some days, you know, it feels like that. So what can we do, right? We're like, relax on these type sizes, everybody. We don't need that many. One site I like to use is Typomatic from Nicole Sullivan, and it's a Firefox extension. And this is really nice if you're ever taking over someone else's work, right? We've all been there. And you sort of want to see what's happening. You can run this and it'll give you an audit of all the different type sizes and colors that are being used on a page. And this is really great because you can come in here and say like, oh, look, they're using the RGB color 59, 59, 59 and 61, 61, 61. I don't know about your eagle eyes, but I don't really think anyone's going to notice that difference in gray, right? So these are the things that maybe you want to be like, let's consolidate these and refactor our CSS and clean this up so we're not using as many type styles. We want to clean our type system. We want to make sure that it's easy and people are seeing more patterns on our website and that it's easy to use. And identifying these pain points and the other ones that I'm sure you have with your team or in projects that you work on are really important to discuss. And not just to complain about them, but to find solutions for how to fix these things. On the other hand, there's things that make developers cheer, right? There's awesome stuff we can do on the web these days. As a developer, I love a challenge, right? I love when someone's like, can we make this? And I'm like, probably, let's try it, right? This is going to be awesome. Let's make it. It's the web. This is like the best job in the world. Let's make something crazy. You know, we've got awesome things we can do with text. We have text masking Eclipse. We can be like, let's use the WebKit mask property. You know what I've got? I want some grungy noise on my site. Let's do it, you know? Let's add this to us. Let's use background clip. Let's add patterns to our type. Let's make this more interesting. Let's not use images for this either. Let's not cut whole images. Let's have flexible selectable text using images as backgrounds. Let's use text rotation. Remember we used to have to cut like 10,000 images if we wanted like a rotated date on something? We don't have to do that anymore. We can use the CSS property text rotation to do that. I'm using it on my site here. I've got this diamond shape. It's actually a rotated square over and then using a negative text rotation to send that back. Totally simple problem. We could probably cut this as an image, but why cut it as an image when we can actually have a CSS solution for this? This is where brainstorming together and finding things as solutions is an awesome way to collaborate with your team. We can get even crazier, right? There's face tracking based on how far away you are from your computer, right? It'll change based on that. And if I'm a developer, what do? I try to break something. I'm like, you made something cool? Let me try to break it by putting 2 people in here, right? I'm such a jerk. Anyway, but it's really neat in that there's all these things that will change. There's all this great new technology to play with when it comes to making our type more legible and beautiful on our websites. The more that we're sharing our knowledge, right, the more we can figure out how to do this on our own sites. You know, as a designer, come to me and be like, hey, I saw this. Can we do this? And I'll be like, yeah, let's figure it out. As a developer, maybe I'll see your designs and be like, hey, have you seen something like this? Maybe we should try applying this to our site. It's a fun way to collaborate with your team. So the last layer, we're finally here. We're at the quality assurance bun, right? We've made it to our final product. We're like, yeah, let's add some text masking. Let's get some colors. Let's get our font sizes in. Let's eat this vegetarian schmitter, shall we? friends, right? I'm going to tell you guys, I don't really care for meetings, but if I had a meeting with a team, they might have said to me, Jen, that is not a good idea. You do not want to eat to that sandwich. Someone might have talked me off a ledge of being like, that's a good idea to throw all that stuff in there and then show it to a room full of people if you stuff in your mouth. And I'd be like, oh, maybe you guys are right. You should be having meetings. You should be having meetings about your projects. And you shouldn't be having meetings, just designer meetings, or just developer meetings, or just UX meetings, or just content meetings, or just PM meetings. You should be having meetings with your whole team because everyone has input on this. Everyone has ideas. Collaborating together will get you the best product. You know, we all say it like it's not just, you know, it's like, oh, there is no creative. There's not, you know, it's in everyone's creative. We all know this medium in which we work on. Talking together will get you into the best project and the best product that you can make. So besides scheduling meetings and internal reviews with your team, I also really like to use CSS preprocessors. Is anyone using a CSS preprocessor here? Some hands, right? It's awesome. I like to use Sass. And essentially what I really like to do is set up variables for the type system. I love to have, you know, if a designer can code, I like to have them just get right into the code and start altering variables. If they're not comfortable in Git, another thing I like to do is just set up a spreadsheet or a document, you know, Basecamp, Google Docs. And what I'll do is set up different variables for things like line heights and font sizes and font families. And that way, the designer can see what sort of information I'm looking for. They can be like, oh, you're coming up with a base font system to help your vertical grid. Or, hey, look, you're looking at the different font sizes or the different colors. And I like to have the designer fill out the variables. This way, we can make sure if there's any updates later on, they know how it's affecting the code and what needs to be changed in order for this to happen. Designers can develop and developers can design. It doesn't need to be a waterfall, throw it over the wall process. I'll also say that, honestly, I know that we're in shorter timelines these days, that designing in the browser has become a thing. And I also think that sometimes it can stifle creativity. What I do think, though, is it's important that we're getting designs into our browser sooner. So maybe only do some work in Photoshop, and then instead QA, don't design in the browser. You know, you can come in here, there's so many screens these days. You don't want to be in Photoshop designing for every single possible width that a website can be seen at. So go ahead, get it into the browser, and then you can do something like, I like to use this little JavaScript snippet that just says the dimensions of the screen I'm currently looking at. And that way I can review with the designer, and we can say things like, hey, you know what, at 540 pixels, let's go ahead and move the type down and bump up the font size. It makes it really easy to go back and forth in a fluid conversation with the designers and developers to be like, let's adjust this here. Let's not make a Photoshop document for 595 pixels, right? Let's just go ahead and QA it in the browser and tweak from there. Dave Rupert also made a really great extension for this called FitWeird, and it'll show you how things will fit at different browsers or different sizes. So hopefully tips and tricks like this will help you get on the same page as your developer and the developer on the same page as the designer, because it totally is possible for us to get onto the same language.
Times New Roman.
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 We can always count on Times New Roman. Thank you, everybody.